Hey, what's going on, everybody? So before we get into the video on the update about the shocks that I installed on my truck, I wanted to take a quick moment and show you some dash cam footage that I have of a vehicle that was driving erratically and my call into 911. Basically, I saw this late model Toyota Corolla that was swerving in the lane, and it caused several vehicles to have to swerve out of its way when it would veer into their lane. After seeing it for a while and realizing the person didn't appear to be texting or anything, I thought, well, maybe it's a medical emergency, maybe the person's intoxicated, who knows. I called 911, gave them the plate number, told them exactly what was happening, and continued to follow this vehicle for a good while. Well, the vehicle never stopped swerving. It was driving in the median, and it pulled up to a light and was about to make a left-hand turn, so I decided, you know what, let me update law enforcement, let them know. Called dispatch again, told them what was going on. They said they would update the records, and nothing ended up happening. The police never showed up. They never were even on the road that I was on. When I backtracked to see if maybe they were finally getting down that road, they weren't there. And what I realized is not necessarily the patrol officer's fault, it's dispatch. It's that disconnect between information coming into dispatch and that information getting out to the law enforcement agent in the field. Oftentimes, it's minutes that go by before an officer is even really dispatched to the scene, and a lot of things can happen in that period of time. I found out at the light, which you'll see in the video, that it was an elderly lady that was driving this vehicle, probably should not be driving a vehicle at all, and it could have turned out to be at least an accident, or at most, possibly a fatality. Only because that delay in information that gets from dispatch to the patrol officer in the field. I think it is really, really a negative thing when you move to such an automated form of police dispatching that you lose that one-to-one communication between the dispatcher and the officer. I remember in the past where you could be on the phone with dispatch and you could actively hear them radioing a patrol officer, giving them updates. In this case, they basically said, thanks for the information, we'll let the officers know and see what happens. The second time I called in, I had to repeat everything over again, the description of the car, the plate number, what they were doing, all of that information, when I just called in not a minute and a half before. So taking all that information down again and then dispatching it out to another officer just creates a time delay that potentially catastrophic things can happen. Anyways, guys, you guys watch the video, you look at it through your own glasses, see what you think should have been done, how it should have been handled. I honestly feel it's unacceptable that when you call in a scenario like this, it takes so long for an officer to respond. Anyways, guys, let's get into the video about the shocks. As most of you are aware, I recently upgraded the shocks on my truck from the factory Rancho shocks, which are essentially a Ford spec shock built by Rancho, to the new Rancho RS9000 XLs, which are a 9-way adjustable shock that replace the factory shocks. On my previous F450, I had Bilstein 5100 series shocks, and on my previous F250, I had Fox 2.0 performance shocks. And the difference between the Fox shocks and the Bilstein shocks, marginal, not much of a difference. They both are incredibly firm shocks, very difficult to compress and even to install because of how difficult they are to compress and how quickly they decompress or expand. Makes them incredibly difficult to install by yourself. You really need someone helping you do it. The Ranchos, on the other hand, the factory Ranchos as well as the 9000s, are relatively easy to install because they're not that difficult to compress. Now, when people who have upgraded their shocks to like a 5100 Bilstein or a Fox talk about the results, they always say, or they generally say, it has improved the ride dramatically. And what I want people to be aware of are not just the function of shocks. Shocks are designed to keep your tires on the road. They're designed to absorb the impact that would normally transfer to the spring and dampen that, so your tires just don't bounce everywhere and the tires stay planted on the road over various types of road conditions. What ultimately ends up happening when you put a firmer shock on is it does respond to a bump quicker and more aggressively, and generally with less rebound. That does not necessarily mean you're going to have a smoother ride by putting a Fox shock or Bilstein on your vehicle. It may actually create more of a firm or harsher ride simply because it's not allowing the spring to move nearly as much. It takes away some of the ability for your suspension to function really the way it's designed. When you put a softer or an OEM style shock in place, its whole purpose is just to dampen the factory spring. Now, the nice thing about the Rancho RS9000 XL is you have those 9-way adjustable knobs that give you the ability to go to a really plush shock or a soft shock that doesn't really do a lot to dampen the spring, all the way to a relatively firm shock. Even at its highest setting, it's not going to be as firm as, say, a Fox or a Bilstein shock. It's going to be probably right under what you might expect those shocks to be. In my opinion, it's a smoother ride. Going to a number 6, number 7 setting on the Rancho 9000 gives me a smoother ride in my truck than the Bilsteins or the Fox shocks had out of the box. I do know that the Fox shocks are valvable. You can customize them, but you do have to send them off and pay to have that done. The Bilsteins are a pretty firm shock right out of the box, and they're a good feeling shock, but it's definitely going to be more on the firmer side. The Rancho shocks that come on the truck definitely fall on the soft side of the shock spectrum. They are more of a plush style shock, even though they're not necessarily a bad shock. A lot of people make claims that they're horrible, but they're not. They perform the task they're designed to do. If they didn't, the truck would bounce all over the road and it would be virtually undrivable. But even when people claim that the shock is blown because it doesn't rebound as quick as they might like it to, again, does not mean that the shock is not functioning or doing its job. The 9000s at the 5, 6, 7 level with the knob are going to perform about the same as the factory Ranchos that come on the truck. When I had them set to number 5, the truck definitely had a lot more bounce to it. It would bounce around a little bit more when I'd hit a bump. It would take a little longer for the truck to settle down after it got done bouncing. When I moved it to a 7, it became noticeable that the shock was a firmer shock, and it actually performed much, much better than not just the Bilstein or the Fox, in my opinion, but better than the factory shock, which I think probably fell more around the 6 mark of the 9000s. Anyways, I'm really impressed with them. I have them on the truck now. They perform really well. The truck does not bounce a lot. There's not a lot of movement after you hit a bump. It feels very smooth and plush, and it rides very smooth. Had I put the Bilsteins on this truck, it would have given me a much more, I guess what you could say, jarring or bumpy ride over certain types of road conditions than the Rancho shocks. But then again, Rancho 9000s, 5000s, that series of shock are going to be more on the plush side. Fox and Bilstein shocks are definitely going to be more performance oriented and more on the firm side. If you look at even some Rancho, I think the 7000 series, which looks a lot like the Bilstein shock, again, more on the performance side. Monotube high pressure shocks are generally going to be a much firmer shock, and it's not going to do much to really improve ride comfort as it might to improve handling, the ability for you to take turns more aggressively without the truck rolling into the turn as much. If you are using a camper on the back of your vehicle, you probably want a firmer shock. You probably want a shock that does not give into body roll as much as maybe the Rancho 9000 or Rancho 5000 shock. The nice thing about the 9000s is I can crank them all the way up to number 9. It's not going to make a terrible difference in terms of creating a super firm shock, but it will definitely increase the firmness of the shock, and it will give me a little bit less body roll, and help when it comes to taking turns or switching lanes if the truck tends to want to roll into those maneuvers. Anyways, guys, I hope that helps you out. I hope that helps explain a little bit about the experience I have right now. I'm very happy with the 9000s and how they perform, and I will give you an update on how well they last and if I have any problems, any leakage or anything like that, which I don't think I will. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and I will talk to you soon.